Welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing muscular and nervous tissue from Chapter 4. This is the third video in the series about tissues, and if you haven't watched the epithelial video and the connective tissue video, please go back and watch those first before continuing on. Although the first thing that people tend to think of when you talk about muscular tissue is something that looks like this, there are actually three types of muscular tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. Their primary function is contraction. This contraction functions to move things around in the body. Because all three have different structures, we know that they will have different functions. And we will learn about skeletal muscles first during the semester, so let's start there. Skeletal muscle tissue is made up of long, thin cells that look like spindles called muscle fibers. If you're wondering what a spindle is, it looks like this. These are voluntary muscles, meaning that you decide when to contract and to relax them. For example, if I asked you to raise your hand, you could choose to listen to me and raise your hand and hold it up there until you're instructed to put it down. Each muscle fiber is striated or striped due to the pattern of alternating proteins that allows them to contract. Each muscle fiber is multinucleated, meaning they have several nuclei per cell. These cells do not divide. Instead, when you build up your muscles, the multiple nuclei in each fiber make additional protein fibers, which cause the muscle to get bigger. And those additional fibers can also exert more force on an object, making you stronger. A note here, I always hear people talking about eating extra protein to build muscle, and it doesn't really work like that. Just eating extra protein doesn't build more muscle. The only way to build skeletal muscle is by using it to lift heavy things. Cardiac muscle is found in the heart. These cells are also striated, but in the case of cardiac muscle, it is not under voluntary control. You cannot squeeze your eyes shut, think very, very hard, and somehow stop your heart from beating. They are involuntary. These cells are also different from skeletal muscle fibers in that each cell only has one nucleus. And these cells are also shaped differently. They are branched instead of spindle-shaped. So that looks like this. So this would be one cardiac muscle fiber. And if I were to draw another one, draw it in a different color, it would interact with this one like so. They contain special intercellular junctions called intercalated discs between where two cells meet. So you would have an intercalated disc here. You can see them on the drawing. Where two cells meet, you have an intercalated disc, and those contain gap junctions. So remember from the epithelial video that gap junctions are like little tunnels between two adjacent cells. This allows the cells to very quickly share information and directions. Because the cells are sharing those instructions, they tend to contract all at the same time as a syncytium. So various parts of the heart will contract all together instead of at random times. Smooth muscle is called smooth because it looks smooth. It has none of the striations the other two types display. It is also involuntary, just like cardiac muscle. Each cell has a single nucleus. You find smooth muscle in the iris of the eyes, within the walls of the stomach, the intestines, the urinary bladder, and arteries. Smooth muscle is in charge of movement also, but it has a couple of different ways of affecting movement throughout the body. In the arteries, for example, when the smooth muscle in the walls of the blood vessels contract, movement through that vessel is slowed or blocked as the contraction closes down the lumen. If you look at a cross-section of an artery, it might look like this when it's relaxed. That's supposed to be a circle. And then when the smooth muscle contracts, it gets much smaller. That makes this diameter much smaller and reduces the volume of blood that can move through it. As the muscle relaxes, the lumen reopens and material can flow through again. In the intestines and the stomach, the alternating patterns of contraction and relaxation actually help to churn up our food and aid with digestion. In addition, it pushes food through the system. In the urinary system, however, contraction of the muscles that line the urinary bladder forces urine out of the body through the urethra. Connective tissue and muscle tissue make up the majority of the weight of the body. Epithelial tissue only makes up 3%, and nervous tissue makes up the least amount at only 2 types. But it is so very important to help all the other types of tissues communicate with one another. The functions of the nervous system is communication. The outer portions of the body, or the periphery, communicate with the central nervous system. The central nervous system receives information from outside, makes a decision on how to react, and communicates its instructions back out to the periphery. Does that sound familiar? It should. It's very similar to a homeostasis loop. And in fact, many of the communication parts of the loop are carried out by the nervous system. The main cells that communicate with each other and with other organs are called neurons. These are cells that have specialized extensions. These extensions receive signals at one end, converts them into nerve impulses or action potentials, conducts the nerve impulses down the long axon, and communicates this information in the form of chemical stimulation to other neurons. Only 10% of nervous tissue is actually made up of neurons. The rest is made up of neuroglia. Neuroglia make up the rest of the cells in the nervous system. There are several different types of cells that are responsible for protecting the neurons, taking care of them, repairing them after an injury, and creating cerebral spinal fluid. Students often make the mistake of thinking that tissues exist by themselves. In reality, these 4 tissue types usually exist together in kind of a sandwich or hamburger type format. Think of the epithelial cells as being the bun, covering the top and the bottom. The connective tissue is the cheese holding it all together. I guess the meat must be the muscle? I don't know. This is where the analogy kind of breaks down. So let's look at a more realistic picture of how tissues work together to make an organ. Here we can see the layers of the wall of the stomach. Let's look more closely at this cross section. The part that is inside the stomach lining the lumen is at the top of this picture, up here. It is lined with simple columnar epithelium. Remember that this type of epithelial tissue is used for protection, absorption, and secretion. And in fact, that is what it does in the stomach. It absorbs water and some nutrients, and it secretes stomach acid and some mucus. Underneath this epithelial tissue is a layer of connective tissue. This is where the blood supply comes through, and that supplies the epithelial layer with blood and nutrients. Underneath that connective tissue layer are 3 layers of smooth muscle. Each layer is going in a different direction. This one kind of goes in that direction. This one is going, I'm trying to draw flat here, in this direction. And this one is actually going back in that direction. This allows the wall of the stomach to contract in several different directions. In between each layer of smooth muscle is a nervous tissue layer, and that is what is bringing the information and instructions to the smooth muscle and telling it when to contract. Below that is one more layer of connective tissue, which again has the red and blue arteries and veins bringing the blood supply to this tissue. The last layer on the bottom is our epithelial tissue. This time it is simple squamous epithelium. In this manner, the tissues that make up the walls of this organ go from inside to outside: epithelial, connective, muscular, nervous, muscular, nervous, more muscular, connective, and then on the outside, more epithelium. A perfect tissue sandwich. Thanks for listening. See you in class.